I'm Jordan Gacious. I helped with PR for the festival. I'm also an actor, and I'm very excited to be moderating this panel. We've got three lovely guests. This is our music licensing panel. The dark irony of this moment is that this is the topic that a lot of filmmakers need to know, but they do not educate themselves about it until they're in the midst of post-production, and it becomes very overwhelming. So thankfully, we three can highlight some issues they might face and offer some advice. I'm going to pass the mic around, and our three guests can introduce themselves, talk about their companies, and kind of give like a day-to-day rundown about what they do with their job.
My name is Bryan Milo. I work for Pilot Music Business Services out of Greenwich, Connecticut. I've been working with this company for the past 19 years. We're a music clearinghouse for all kinds of television productions, film productions. We've done internet productions. Podcasts is becoming somewhat popular for us most recently. On a day-to-day basis, we are contacted by producers who want music in their productions, and we do the research for them on the songs that they are interested in licensing and help negotiate the rights to use those songs in their productions, and handle all that stuff for them. After that, we also help facilitate the actual hard copy licenses as well. So we're sort of full service operation to make sure all of their licensing needs are met from the beginning stages all the way through the end to the final licenses, and where all for signatures, payments, and all that stuff.
My name is Tyler. I'm a senior licensing manager at Epidemic Sound. So we are a Swedish music company, actually. We've opened our office here in the US in New York just a little over a year ago, so I've been with them since then. But we are more of a production music library, so we actually own all the rights to a catalog of about 25,000 songs, and we commission songs directly from composers and artists. So we license music directly, whether it's advertisements, films, TV shows. We also do some custom composition work as well. So day to day for me is pretty similar. People reach out to us, have questions about licensing, so we negotiate the licensing deals for songs that are in our library. So that we only work with songs that are exclusively in our library, so we don't work with outside composers. But we license pretty much anything, so any kind of AV content. We do some podcasts as well, so podcasts are becoming more popular, but pretty much any kind of AV content, so everything from a small web series to a Netflix show, so we kind of cover it all. So we both look for new opportunities, and then we have producers, filmmakers that reach out to us as well, so pretty similar.
Hello, I'm James Panepinto from the Music Playground. We are a licensing and music production company here in New York. I have been there for about 10 or 11 years. I am a creative director and licensing manager. We do original composition for film, television, and advertising. We have a staff of composers. We also do music consulting on the supervision side and clearance side. And we represent a roster of approximately 200 bands and artists for licensing in television and film. So we have our own catalog that we're pitching for licensing. We also do the clearances, kind of a similar mix of what you guys are doing. So yeah, a little bit of everything.
If you're a very, very novice filmmaker, all this might have just gone over. So I'm going to start with some basic questions, and we'll get even more intricate as we go. But if I was a filmmaker and I was to approach you for music for my film, what would be my first step for each of you individually?
One of the first steps is you have to know what your media distribution is going to be. That's one of the biggest questions that needs to get asked up front, and so we know what rights we're going to seek for you. Is it just film festival rights? Are there internet rights? Is it full theatrical release? So understanding what rights you're trying to obtain, because each level of those rights that go up affects the price of the project. And then, since I deal primarily in commercial music clearances, is sort of managing the expectations of, what the client wants, and if that's attainable within the budget that they have for the song.
Yeah, I mean, just to piggyback off that, know exactly kind of what, or at least have a sense of what your distribution strategy is. So we operate a little more differently just because we do offer direct license, so it's kind of, but it still does affect the license fee. And it's obviously, it kind of affects, basically, where you can, where you can distribute your project depending on where the music is cleared. Particularly if you're, now it's kind of, I think a lot of people, filmmakers don't realize, especially with the internet and streaming platforms, content travels across territories much easier than it did with just the actual distribution or physical sales. So just making sure that you've kind of dotted all of your T's and, or dotted all of your I's, crossed all your T's. Because, yeah, it's like it happens all the time that from, filmmakers that I've worked with, on other projects in the past. Even, particularly on the low end, they think, no one will ever really find out or whatnot, it's not a big of a deal, but I think music clearance is, it's the biggest key, especially if you want to get your project sold or picked up by anyone else too. So when filmmakers reach out to us, you can just make sure that, they know exactly what they're trying to do with their project. Make sure we help them out with a little bit of music supervision, but just kind of make sure that they're fully cleared for their project.
Yeah, agreeing with these two gentlemen to my left. I think one thing I would add is, in my role at the Music Playground, one of the first things we do is we take a look at the creative with the filmmaker and work with them with all these questions in mind about budget and terms and media and use to assess and analyze what the best potential music or type of music use is, whether it's licensing music from artists in the world, whether it's looking at stock music or production music, whether it's going with original composition and hiring composers, creating your own score. So that's kind of the first part of the process, is looking at what type of music option you want to pursue in conjunction with looking at all the rights necessary, budget. And the budget is often the first question, just to kind of put things into a realistic perspective, which is something you often have to do in licensing. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. And going off of what you just said about budget, what percentage would you say a filmmaker's overall budget should be placed into music? And within that music budget specifically, where do you recommend the money goes?
I don't know if I have a direct answer to that question. That's a decision the filmmakers, how much are they willing to spend on the music. Some producers are very adamant that the song that they're looking for is going to make or break their film or their project. So they're willing to spend whatever it takes to get that song, but they have to be willing to do that and to make that, if they're going to have to cut somewhere else in order to afford the song that they want to use. So I think that's a good answer for that.
Yeah, I think it's kind of there. It's a creative decision of like, is the music more an artistic choice, where therefore, if you want that one specific song, you may have to spend more to get it, or if it's kind of more functional music. So music that's kind of just more, it helps the scene, elevates the scene, but it doesn't necessarily make or break the scene. I think I've heard, obviously it depends on the budget, but I think I've heard like 2% of like a film's budget be music. So something around that range maybe. Again, depending on if you're just licensing pre-existing music, or if you're doing, a custom score, obviously that, all comes into play. But
Yeah, well, I run a music licensing company, so I'd suggest as much as possible.
yeah.
But yeah, I guess it's whatever accomplishes your needs in the most effective way as a filmmaker. It's hard to really estimate that, but plan for more than you expect, because things are usually more expensive than you might assume. That would be my piece of advice. Was that the question?
Yeah. Off the idea of like, not being a director, I haven't felt this burning desire, but I know some directors definitely have a passion for one song in particular that they're like almost married to. So like if I was making a short called I Want You Back, and I want the song I Want You Back in it, but I cannot afford the Jackson 5, what do you recommend? What do you recommend to a client in that situation? Like, do you start looking at covers? Do you start looking at songs with similar vibes? Like, how do you resolve that?
Covers are an option, but if it's commercial music, you're still going to have to pay the publishing fees, which means you're still going to have to go to MyJack Music and get the rights. You may not have to pay for the master recording if you do your own version of it, but there's still publishing fees involved. So that's not necessarily it's some cost savings, but not a way to really slash the budget too much there. The other thing is we start to sit down and suggest alternatives, other songs that are similar in a similar vein, and depending on their budget is sort of where you guide them. You know, you can look at other commercial music songs that are easier to obtain or are not going to cost as much, or you can steer them towards music libraries like you guys have it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it happens a lot where people will say, you know, they want, obviously they know, again, because cost, they can't license the one song, so people will say, all right, well, we want something in the vein of, you know, I Want You Back. So, you know, for instance, we have music supervisors that work for our company that, you know, will send over, they'll, you know, go through our catalog and then go through songs that obviously, you know, maybe sound alike, but also have the same kind of vibe, would carry the same kind of emotion. So, yeah, obviously that's a much more cost-effective option because there's between, you know, production music libraries, between, you know, stuff that's sort of, there's so much music out there that's available to sync that doesn't cost the same, nearly as much as what it costs to, you know, license like an original commercial song. So I think there's definitely always options out there. You just have to really look. I mean, if you're really committed to that specific sound, but you'll definitely find something that will, you know, carry a scene probably in a similar way.
Yeah, totally agree. There are so many different music options out there, whether it's library, whether it's catalog artists or independent smaller artists. You know, if you can't afford that track, you need to have. There are numerous companies out there that can help you find something. Reach out to a publisher, reach out to a music house or a music company or a library, and a lot of these companies do searches for free, so they're there and they will provide you a selection of options from their catalog that are a good fit. You know, you're not going to nail the Jackson 5, but you can get close. You could probably find an instrumental that's up there. I mean, you can get something in the ballpark that's probably a tenth of the price, maybe even less, because that's an expensive song.
And I'm going to open this question up to whichever of you feels the most passionate about it, so that way you're not always in the hot seat. What would you say there are ways that indie filmmakers could save money on music, but then what would you also recommend that they do not skimp on spending money on for music?
So what would you, the question is to save money on music?
Yeah, save, like where do you recommend that indie, like if your bare bones budget,
Yeah.
if you had to slash something for the music part of their budget, where do you suggest they do that? But then also where do you suggest they definitely put their money to good use, you know?
Yeah. I know that you can get more out of library music or custom composition than you can out of known songs. In a lot of scenarios, composers, libraries, and music houses have splits available for tracks. They have music that you can take a 2-minute piece of music and turn that into a 4-minute piece of music. You can modify or customize if you're working with a composer and, you know, turn 1 or 2 compositions into turn that into uses throughout your project. So that would be a place where if you're looking for a more cost-efficient solution, working with production libraries, composers, you know, they can work with you to modify their content and make it work for a budget and be flexible. And the second part was there's one.
Yeah, there's like a spot of their music budget where they definitely should spend the good money. Is that probably in hiring you?
I would say I'll pass that on.
I mean, the other thing I could just consider is opening credits, closing credits. Use of music in those two places is more expensive than actually in the body of the film. So if you're looking for a way to save money, don't necessarily spend it on your opening credits or your closing credits if somewhere in the middle of the film you really need that piece of music to set the mood or set the scene. That might be an option.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add. So
Okay, this is a bit of like a pop quiz section of the show, but in case you're a total noob, like I was researching for this, would anyone like to explain what a music supervisor does to someone in the audience who's probably too afraid to ask?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, for kind of more than we do, for music supervision is a little bit more for advertising, but I think in general it applies to any kind of scripted or unscripted content, to anything that's long form. But generally a music supervisor will, well, in our case, so there's kind of two different roles I think here, but so music supervisors that work directly for us they'll do searches, they'll put together playlists, put together options based on creative briefs, whether that's from a producer, whether it's from a filmmaker, whether again maybe they'll have a specific song in mind, like I Want You Back, or maybe they don't even know what song they want to use, but they'll describe the scene, they'll describe tones, mood. Music supervisor will, in our case, find music that fits that creative brief. Multiple options, pitch the music to them about why it could work for a scene. And then in other cases, music supervisors work independently, where they will work more with commercial music labels and artists to actually pitch those labels and artists to shows. Those are from, I think, more higher end sync deals. But essentially, I think a music supervisor is somebody that, they're knowledgeable of music and how music can improve any kind of moving image. But also they're knowledgeable of rights and making sure that the use of that song is cleared, particularly when you're dealing with multiple rights holders, whether those are labels, publishers. So they're knowledgeable of the business side, the legal side, but also the creative side. So I think they kind of bridge that gap between the two worlds.
Thanks, that's really helpful.
Solid answer.
Yeah, could someone else also please explain what a performing rights society is? That was one of those terms I couldn't find it.
The performing rights societies are the entities responsible for collecting and distributing royalties for the intellectual property owners in a piece of music. In the US, we have ASCAP, BMI, and CSAC, and these are things that don't necessarily affect filmmakers directly, but when you use a piece of music in your film, you have to be sure to credit the publishers and writers as members of certain societies, and then those societies are collecting and paying royalties on the back end for broadcast, or they pay a very small amount for internet, but for broadcast or internet use. And that is the gist of it. So they hold the compositions are registered with the PROs, and the PROs collect royalties from the networks and then distribute it amongst their members.
Just to add a little bit short to that. It basically is, from my position when we're licensing commercial music, they are the basic databases that we go to find out who owns the songs, who were the composers on the song, and then which entities represent those composers, so we can contact them and to find out what they're willing to use or not use.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If you're a filmmaker that has original music for your film, what percentage would you say that you split the ownership with the composer's rights? If that makes sense. Or is there even like a set percentage?
It's an interesting question. It all depends on your contract with the composer, and that can be really negotiated in a number of ways. As a filmmaker, if you're hiring a composer, you could, it could be a buyout situation where you then come to own the music and you can use it as you want in the future. That would be generally a more expensive situation with the composer. There are other scenarios where maybe it's the scope of your permitted use of the music is less. You can negotiate lower fees, and then the composer would keep more of the rights ownership of the music, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have anything to add. I don't know if there's any set standard for that question.
Yeah. I know that in some cases we've done this thing where there's like a window of exclusivity, I guess maybe more for, but then at a certain point then, the composer might, we would get rights after a certain period, so that maybe it would make, distribution a little bit easier for a film. But yeah, I don't think there's a set answer or percentage. I don't know if you have anything to add. Yeah, I think
It's all negotiated with the composer,
Yeah.
what they're willing to either retain on behalf of themselves or, lend to the production. Not lend, but, buyouts and stuff like that.
Right.
At that level of like intricacy, would you recommend that a filmmaker hire a lawyer to like properly credit the composer if they're starting to like give out the rights to the music, or is that just like a different topic entirely? If that makes sense.
Well, probably at that level, there would probably be, the filmmakers would have their legal team, then I'm sure the composer would have his legal team, his or her legal team, and whoever represents the composer too. So there definitely would be negotiation at that level. But yeah, basically it would be negotiated. But all that stuff is, like we've said, it is pretty negotiable on both ends to figure out something that's mutually beneficial.
I feel like I'm popcorning questions all over the place for you guys, so thank you for being champs. In general though, what would you say has surprised each of you the most about the jobs you have now? Like looking back when you first started, is there something you wish you could have whispered into your young, naive mind about what you're getting yourself into? Good or bad?
I'm a little bit newer on the job, so these guys might have something better.
There is a lot of paperwork.
Yeah.
It is in licensing, there's clearances, licensing, it's a lot of back and forth, a lot of negotiations, a lot of tracking down rights owners, a lot of documentation. So there is a creative side to it where you're investigating and finding the best music for your project, and then there is the administrative side of it, which might make up 75% of the job in some cases where so much of it is negotiating fees and finding clearances. Some songs in the known music world, top 40 artists or well-known music, you might find that there's 7 publishers on a song that each one needs an individual clearance from. So you then have to reach out to those 7 publishers and the record label and get a quote from all of them, and then tie that all together back into the final license. And they might each provide you a different quote or in a different term. So it can get complicated in that sense of things. And I didn't know that starting out. That'll be more fun.
I had no music background when I got into music licensing. So it was all sort of very eye-opening to me to learn about publishing rights and master rights and performance societies and stuff like that. It was all new when I started, and also at that time, 19 years ago, was just when the internet was beginning to explode. So it was like a whole new set of rights that nobody knew how to handle or deal with. Kind of like the podcast world right now, where nobody's really sure exactly how those. It's not that they're not sure how they don't. The rights holders are not sure how they want to license those rights out right now. So it was at that time, it was the internet. Nobody knew like how big the internet was going to get, how far that was going to go. it was right when Napster was big, right when I graduated from college. So everybody was worried about digital downloads and pirating music and stuff like that. So it was a lot. It was a lot to learn. It was always fun, but I've enjoyed my time in music licensing a lot. So
Yeah, I just to add on that. I mean, I think the biggest thing I learned too is just negotiating. So just really for the role that I'm in, but selling the worth of the music that we have and why why the license fees should be what they should be and whatnot. So I think this applies to any creative field, and filmmakers in general. When you're selling your film and whatnot, just never sell your creative short, in a way.
yeah.
And is there a preferred way you'd like to have filmmakers contact you? If you're watching on your computer?
We have a website, and they're welcome to contact us via email, and let us know what their project is, and we'll definitely have a consultation with them. We move forward from there.
Yeah, same. Just email us through the website, and then typically people email us, and then we like to get on the phone as soon as possible because it's so much easier to really hash things out over the phone than an email chain that goes on for weeks. So.
Yeah, same process. We're themusicplayground.com, and then we generally set up a creative call, talk through the process and the client's needs, and we go from there. Thank you.
Sweet. I'm going to open questions up to our audience.
Great.
I have a question about the use of a familiar theme, but in parody form. This is not the one I'm thinking of, but just to use an example, if you're going to do a parody of Close Encounters, so that you did a 5-note theme that was not those notes, what kind of scary territory do you get into? Because it is parody, but is there something about licensing that we should check beforehand about that?
Are you saying that the melody is the Close Encounters theme?
If it were, that the idea is if you're doing a parody of Close Encounters, and then you wanted to use a 5-note theme, but it was not that 5-note theme. You see what I mean? So it's the same piece of music, but it's not. You adapt because it's a parody. You don't want to use the same thing. You want to use something different, but that's evocative of it.
Something I've never been
Okay,
faced with.
great. Well, of course, that's.
Yeah, again, I wouldn't say the 100% correct answer, but that could fall under like fair use. If you are, but also if you're not using the actual original recording of,
Right.
So you're sort of creating your own, and it is slightly off. You could probably make from like a legal argument. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not giving you legal advice, but I would think that's something you would consult with, somebody that does have the knowledge of that. But that could fall under parodies. I think do fall under like fair use, so you would kind of be exempt from having to license that original.
So it wouldn't be the original recording, wouldn't be that same piece of music. It would be something else that would make people go, oh, that's the same thing upside down,
Right, yeah. There's definitely, I think you have a case there for sure to, but again, I would consult with somebody that knows more for sure.
It's kind of piggybacking off of kind of the fair use theme, particularly with like documentaries, particularly like music documentaries or biopics, maybe not biopics, but documentaries that are sort of explaining or analyzing a piece of music. It's something that I've found, or through the little research I've done and discussions I've had with people, that there's a bit of leeway in terms of fair use when it comes to describing a piece of music content, how it pertains to the story. Is there any truth to that, or is there ways to sort of get around being able to use an actual song or track as long as it's apparent, like describing it within the film itself, and in sort of an analytical way? Or I may be totally off base if that's something you've ever heard about.
Yeah, it's also interesting.
I don't have a ton of experience with fair use, but the scenarios that the projects I've worked on where that has been something that they were able to claim were something that was actually captured in real time and music that was existing in a scene that was shot and not added by the filmmaker. So I've never heard of a scenario where music was used in a project and not required a license, unless it's in the background, like playing out of a car that you had to happen to shoot on the street there, and like you hear like a few seconds
So
of it.
that's ephemeral uses, and those are okay.
Yeah.
Beyond that, I haven't encountered a situation where if you're actually using the existing recording, you know, there's a publisher and a master rights holder there that would need to be licensed from, in my experience.
Yeah, and I think the ephemeral uses, which is what we would capture background noise. You have to, I think, be careful with those at times too, because if it's live, then it's one thing. But once you actually move it to another medium, if you're going to stream it on the internet, then then it's no longer live. So even if you didn't put it into production, I think once you start moving it to other mediums, then you actually are responsible for that music. But
Yeah. Always better be safe than sorry.
Sure.
In case.
So you guys who deal with independent film, or you two kind of do a lot of that, right? Independent film. So of course, lots of those films, they don't even have distribution deals. Even some of the great films that go to a festival like Sundance or something, they're not going to get bought until the festival. So do you do a lot of things where maybe you start them off with the simplest contract they need for their budget, and then they keep coming back to you as the distribution keeps growing? Is that how that works?
Yeah. So yeah, we've done that before, particularly with independent film. A lot of filmmakers, like you said, they'll start off with a festival. So we would license, the song or whatever they're using for just use in festivals. And you say it's either festivals in the U.S. or festivals in North America, whatnot, and they kind of negotiate that. But usually start with something small like that, and then if the film does get bought, usually whoever buys the film, they want to make sure all the rights are clear too. So then they would come to us to license, for whatever the platforms there. So if it's going to be streaming, if it's going to be theatrical, then that would be added on. But yeah, we do that. So if you're working on a film and you completed it, you want to have music and you want to properly license the music, but you don't know all the all the steps or how far it's going to be distributed, if you don't have anything lined up, we can kind of piecemeal licensing, particularly starting with like festivals and whatnot. So yeah, that's an option, at least with our company.
Yep, same situation.
I mean, I would also add that you can, they're called basically step deals, where you can actually pre-negotiate all those steps all the way up. So you say, okay, here's your initial fee, and then if this happens, then this fee kicks in, and then if that happens, this fee kicks in. So you don't have to keep constantly going back and saying, okay, now we have to come back to you and realize. You can do it all up front, and you know all your costs going in up front.
Bueller.
We got a question. So like you kind of said, the bulk of being a music supervisor, a lot of it's very administrative and a lot of documentation. How does one sort of break into that career without having necessarily any experience in that realm? Maybe they have a vast comprehension of music and a creative sense, but I mean, there's such different sort of aspects of the job. How does one kind of break through that barrier and kind of get into that career path?
I'll answer that. I mean, because I didn't have any music background when I just got very lucky with my boss who owns the company was looking to hire somebody. I was about a year out of college and looking for a job, or I had a job but I was looking for something else, and she was willing to hire me and train me. So that was a real opportunity for me. Just worked out.
Yeah, I mean, similar to me too, actually. So I started actually in production, like video film production. Started out doing kind of more commercial work, and then did some documentary work, and then some independent film work, and then happened to the job I'm in now just kind of happened to sort of fall in my lap, and it was new for me too. I wasn't in the music industry before. But it was kind of, I've always had an interest in music, so I think if if you're interested in both film, television, but you're also interested in music, it's pretty easy to, kind of bring those worlds together. So yeah, I mean, then, a lot of it for me was just learning on the job, doing a lot of research, educating myself, learning from people who have more experience than I do. So I mean, I think it's definitely, doable, for sure. I mean, you just gotta it's good to find the right opportunity that'll kind of, hit the ground running a little bit, but, you can also learn along the way, so.
Yeah, I know from my experience, a lot of the supervisors or music houses have internship programs, and that's how a lot of the staff comes to be there full time. It's a great way to learn on the job, learn on the fly. It's such a niche industry that there's not that much information out there about the actual processes until you're actually learning from someone who's experienced and who has done it. I started as an intern and learned on the job, and worked up from there. So yeah, that's the process. I think a lot of supervisors are operating in small companies. It's like a few people. Some are just independent, freelancers who get pulled onto jobs, and they maybe have a staff of a few people. So oftentimes they have assistants, interns, or coordinators working with them who kind of handle the more administrative tasks and the organizational part of the job while they're overseeing kind of the client relationships and the creative aspects of things. So there's definitely a need for that role, for people to be there and learn on the job and help out. So yeah, just reach out and see if you can get an internship.
Yeah.
So what are some of the biggest or most interesting clients that each of your companies have worked with thus far? And interesting could be anything from just the content being exciting to possibly travails in your licensing of the music. So anything like that.
These are war stories.
Let's see.
Have you licensed a Michael Jackson song before?
I have. He probably has more commercial
Yeah.
experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's possible.
You mentioned the company name, right? Or the
Well, my Jack is the publishing name for Michael Jackson's
Okay.
Music catalog. So yes, we have, and yeah, it's changed over the years. I mean, he used to go through lawyers rather frequently when he was alive. So it was, sometimes you would be calling, and they're like, "I was a new lawyer. He's learning all the catalog again. It'll take a little while before you get an answer." But yeah, it is possible to clear.
My company does a lot of work in television and advertising, but on the film side, one of the more interesting projects we worked on was a feature documentary that completed this past winter. It's called Madman, the Steve Madden story. And the project for us was pretty exciting because we were brought in as music supervisors, but we were also creating the original score. And so for this project, we were licensing music from labels from the existing world. We were licensing indie artists that we ourselves work with, and then our composers were also creating the score. So we wrote about 40 cues and licensed about 20 pieces of music for the film, and handled all clearances and budget negotiations. So on our side, we were working directly with the director and editor and the producers and the money people on the film. And it was a great experience to be there with the filmmakers and handle the creative stuff and execute all the administrative stuff as well. It was a ton of work, but it's worth it.
I think project that we worked on recently that was kind of exciting was Shy. It's not a show on Showtime. Yeah, I mean it ranges. So it's fun when you get to work on larger stuff like that. But yeah, no real horror stories yet. So keep my fingers crossed.
You in the back. Oh, okay.
Has there ever been an experience where you were maybe shot down the first time and persisted 2 or 3 more times to continue the negotiation within the budget for your client? An experience that took a lot of persistence.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of our job when we're working on behalf of the filmmaker or the client, whichever it is to be passionate about their project and try to pass that passion along and explain, you're trying to say, listen, this is really important to them. If you can convey what, that passion or that need, then there is a possibility that you can turn a no into a yes.
Yeah, I mean, it just like more for in my experience, it's kind of more about selling why selling why a certain song works for a certain scene. So just kind of pitching more something that we worked with directly, why it would work for this scene. So it's kind of a little bit of a reverse pitch in that sometimes too. But yeah, I mean, it's always good to stay persistent in anything. So I think that's what I've learned about negotiating. But know that there's always kind of different, particularly with licensing, because you're dealing with different rights and whatnot. You have a lot of kind of levers to use in negotiation as well.
Yeah, persistence is key in negotiations. In many of the projects I've worked on, they've come to us with music that was well out of the budget of the filmmaker. It's a very common thing, like a Rolling Stones song in your indie film that's just going to a film festival. So it's the persistence is there, and you as I'm talking, I'm reliving some of the experiences of trying to get a quote through. It can be very difficult. Some of the larger publishers and labels are not flexible, and they are not willing to move very much on their pricing. At least that's the experience I've had with a lot of projects. They believe in the value of their music, and I think they have enough interest in their catalogs that generally they're not willing to bend very far. But with the more catalog music, the smaller publishers, indie labels, that kind of stuff, there generally is a lot of flexibility, and people are willing to do what it takes to make a project work.
Sorry. Oh, no, thanks. What would you say then are like common mistakes filmmakers have when they first meet with you? Is it mainly that kind of situation?
Yeah.
Thanks.
The one piece of advice I would give is not to litter your song with your film with Beatles music and tracks. Like, a good rule of thumb is if like your mom and grandma knows the song, you probably can't afford it. It gets really expensive. In some cases, shockingly, like you're making a documentary and they want $80,000 for a Nirvana song or something. So the fees can get astronomical when you're dealing with really well-known music. And this is a scenario I've encountered numerous times where a client comes in with a budget of $5,000 to $10,000 for their film music, and they have $500,000 worth of music in the project. So my piece of advice would be, don't get too attached to the temp music you're dropping in there, and know that if it's a super famous track, it's just going to command a really high fee.
Yeah, I think just reiterate on that. Know that there's a lot of good music out there that I've never heard. There's a lot of good production music out there that I wouldn't just dismiss music just because it has never really played on the radio or anything, or you haven't heard it before. So just really know that you're going to have an option that works just as well for a fraction of the cost. So have an open mind when it comes to the music you use, particularly when you don't have the budget.
I think the only thing I might add to that is that so a lot of artists are always want to promote their newest stuff, and so if you're going to them and you want their famous song from 3 albums ago, that's not going to be as forthcoming as their brand new album that they just released last month, and they want to get that music exposure. So those are they're always looking to push their music.
So I'm sure that every situation's different, as most things are in filmmaking. But when you've gone from United States festival distribution licensing to North American, and then eventually adding Europe to that, generally how much of an increase in expense has that been for films or projects you've worked on? because you guys were talking about like when you negotiate sometimes the rates in advance when you're just doing a United States festival run, and then if you want to increase that to like a North American festival run, and then eventually to a European festival run, like about how much of an increase in cost has that been for the filmmaker?
I mean, it depends, but I mean, typically for like festivals, it would be, particularly if you're doing with like North America and then Europe. I mean, it would be the same cost added on. Usually, like in our case, I mean, obviously it depends where you're licensing the music from.
So about double? Like
Yeah,
if you're like
double.
North American, and then Europe costs about the same as that North
Yeah,
American
exactly.
did? Okay.
Yeah. So I would, prepare for that. Usually, I think in general, prepare for it to be, double. But there is obviously flexibility in that.
At least with our own catalog that music we've created or represent, oftentimes when we're thinking about a new quote for a new territory, we look at it in terms of the market size and population. So if you're asking, if you already have North America and you're asking to add a small country with, a few million people, like it'll be a ratio of population to population in terms of the fee to the fee, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of a jumping off point. If you're wondering to yourself, how much more will this cost? If it's a similar sized territory, the fee is probably going to be in the same ballpark. If it's a much smaller territory, it'll be less. Much larger, it's going to potentially be more.
So if you want to do like a small festival in like the Virgin Islands, it won't be a lot. But if you want to run your film at the Berlinale, then it's going to be a lot more.
Right,
Okay.
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
Where would you say you see the industry going in like the next 5 years? And how do you think it's changed the most over the course of your career?
Well, I mean, I think the big thing is just there's so much more content being produced now that like the demand for sync, demand for sync licensing has just gone up too, because I mean everybody has their own OTT platform. There's so many streaming sites. There's so many there's just content everywhere. So the demand for music and for creators to be able to license music at a reasonable rate. There's definitely a lot of room for growth there, and so I mean I would just say that because there's just so much content being produced now. There's just such more demand for sync licensing. But
Yeah, I completely agree. The content itself is increasing, and just the accessibility to making music is increasing the volume of available music. It's so astronomically. Production music is growing so much compared to where it was 15 or 20 years ago, and artist music, people can create a record in their bedroom, in their home studio, etc., and people are making great music, in anywhere. So there's just so much music and so much content. So yeah, it just looks like there's just more opportunity, more great music to find a place for.
I think I'd see the biggest changes are just the various platforms. You didn't have streaming simulcast videos on the internet for a basketball game 5 years ago. So a lot of companies now, if you're working for a large production company, you have to account for all of their platforms where that music could potentially end up, or where that the video and then that potential music. Sometimes they'll send clean feeds if it's going to simulcast to other territories, but sometimes they can't clean the feed. So you have to make sure that you're accounting for all of their platforms. And I think just it's where how many more devices can be added and how many more different scenarios of stuff. So you always have to account. And now these companies, it's all of their stuff. It's not just their channel, or it could be their 5 channels, or it's a lot of branding. It's all together, and it's all packaged. They see it as a package deal because it's like, this is my content and I own it, and I want to put it everywhere, everything that I own. And you have have to account for all those platforms.
Yeah. Yeah. And just one thing that I would add on that, and you see too, like with even like Facebook getting into content, like but they all want to own like the content, so they want to own everything that's in that content too. So I think it's making licensing a little interesting too. So you're seeing a lot more ownership outright of content, particularly as the larger ones try to compete for streaming views.
Thank you. Any other questions? Awesome. Thank you all for being here. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yay!